Hello and welcome to Data Conversations over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. Today is the second in a series that we're doing on the very important topic of ethics in AI. And I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Adams, who is the Senior Research Specialist at the Human Sciences Research Council down in Cape Town. Last week I had a conversation with Nanda Padiachi from Standard Bank, and it was a great conversation. It was philosophical, but at the same time, we really looked at the corporate application of ethics in AI. And today I kind of really want to understand the human side. So Rachel is joining me. It's great to have you on, Rachel. I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been?
Fine, thank you, Craig. Lovely to be here, just trying to survive lockdown, but happy to be involved in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think like everybody, we're just trying to get through this lockdown period, but hopefully once summer kicks in, things will open up.
Hopefully so.
Yeah. So Rachel, maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into your role at the Human Sciences Research Council, because I would say that potentially not a lot of people watching know about the council. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into what it is that the council does and obviously your role within that before we really get into the meat of the conversation.
Sure. So the Human Sciences Research Council is a statutory body that was established a number of years ago to understand issues around social change and to bring the social sciences, and when it was originally set up, it was more broadly termed the human sciences, to bring the social sciences into conversations around the development of policies and to support state work, but also to advance social science research on the continent. So the HSRC is the largest social sciences research institution on the African continent, and we work very closely with our African partners as much as we can in promoting social science research here in South Africa and across the continent. In terms of my work there, I am looking at understanding what the implications of artificial intelligence and more broadly the fourth industrial revolution are on South African society. Because I come from a largely legal background, a lot of my work is in understanding the legal implications. But within the field of AI, because it is so ubiquitous, because it works on such a global level and state sovereignty is not the first and foremost port of call, ethics has become a more dominant framework for thinking about the regulation of AI rather than law. Give me 1 second. Okay, so so I was just saying that the way in which artificial intelligence works across global society means that ethics has become a more dominant framework for regulating AI or thinking about the regulation of AI than law, because it works at a more universal, supposedly more universal level.
Okay. So I think, one of the things that kind of stands out there for me is South Africa and globally, most countries have fairly large societal issues that maybe sort of are, when you look at it, sort of bigger than technology and the impact of technology. So how do you sort of then see AI really impacting society in South Africa and across the continent in a really good way? I mean, there's so much talk around AI for good and data for good. What are you sort of seeing, or what are you kind of really trying to look for where this sort of technology can help some of those societal issues?
So I think there has been a lot of discourse. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion about how advanced digital technologies and artificial intelligence is going to bring so much benefit to society, and particularly in developing contexts, it's thought about as being able to leapfrog into a more developed context. That's the kind of broad narrative around it. And basically, it is this idea of efficiency and being able to more efficiently manage and govern issues in societies and address problems. finding out, understanding society better, understanding where the sticking points are with regards to particular social issues, and artificial intelligence being able to provide really useful, pertinent, relevant, timely, in real time, often information about social issues. So for me, there is so much talk about the benefit that artificial intelligence can bring. And we cannot be talking about it in such a kind of bloated, convoluted way without thinking critically about the new concerns and effects and inequalities that it can bring about. So my work has really been on the other side, to really think about what are the consequences of using, or so uncritically, using such technologies in such broad and ubiquitous ways in almost every sector of society. And I think there are many.
So I think, the understanding society better quite obviously has a lot of positive implications, in terms of service delivery and improving, overall living standards, a reduction in this inequality that we're seeing. And I think, this current pandemic has really highlighted the inequality that we have in the country and across the continent. So there's a lot of positive things, but they would be using very personal and sensitive data on people. And then there's also the fact that, typically sensitive things will come into that, like race and social class and all these sorts of things. So I guess that's where the sort of ethical considerations for AI in this application really comes in. How do you make sure that bias doesn't come in? How do you make sure that it doesn't seem unfair, that it's quite obviously pointing out some of these big issues that we've got in society?
Yeah, I think you ask a number of very pertinent questions there. I think in terms of the current pandemic and the role of digital technologies there, we have seen how those with access to digital technologies now are much better able to navigate and overcome the difficulties with regards to lockdown, whether that's schooling, whether that's access to entrepreneurship and possibilities for bringing in an income. We can see that access to digital technologies is now a key marker of being able to be resilient to these kinds of issues within society. In terms of personal data, privacy is generally considered the biggest ethical implication of artificial intelligence. I don't necessarily think it is the biggest one. I think part of the issue with artificial intelligence is that it is modeled and presented as something that is neutral and objective and largely unbiased. And because of that, we fail to see and fail to understand the biases that do then occur. But privacy is a huge one. And I think one of the biggest problems that I've certainly seen through my work in South Africa is that people are generally not aware of how their personal data is used and gathered through digital technologies, and even just having a mobile phone. And the fact that if you have a mobile phone, it means the telecommunications company knows where you are at any given point. There is not a good awareness of the privacy issues surrounding digital technologies, and in turn, there's not a large awareness of the rights that people have, the data rights that people have under South African law to challenge circumstances where a bias may occur or an unfavorable outcome may occur as a result of the processing of their personal information.
Yeah. So I think that's quite a big point, is really the understanding of how, data or your personal data is used in an AI, or sort of in business in general, but obviously AI is driving a lot of these things. And I talked with Nanda last week, and it comes up quite regularly, is the explainability of AI. And that kind of needs to be a big part of the ethical consideration. Is, if someone had to ask, and in a big society sort of application of AI, a lot of people wouldn't really understand that. So how do you sort of look at, how you explain to someone how you've come to that outcome, that insight, etc., based on their data, because it's quite technical. I mean, I don't even pretend to really understand how these models are created from the technical perspective. So how does that ethical consideration come in?
Yeah, so to date, there have been a proliferation of ethical guidelines and frameworks, largely developed at an international level or coming out of the West, that have promoted three core values with regards to AI ethics. The first is fairness, which broadly speaks to non-bias. Non-discrimination. The second one is accountability, which presumes that a system is understandable in order for somebody to bear accountability for when that system produces an unfavorable outcome. And then the third one is transparency, and that effectively relates to the explainability of a system. What I think is interesting, perhaps, about your conversation with Nando last week is that explainability issue works at both a macro level and a micro level. So it's at a macro level, it's understanding how AI works within society and the broader kind of macro technical issues around the kind of growing complexity of how it functions within society. And yes, I think there's limited understanding. Even I have a very limited understanding of how exactly it all works. So that's the one issue. And then on a micro issue with algorithmic processing, particularly around deep learning, where you have all these layers of analysis and data processing, it can be effectively impossible to trace how a machine, how an algorithm came to a particular decision with regards to an individual. So in those cases, it can be very hard to show whether the machine was biased, whether it had taken a discriminatory piece of information and based a decision around that, because it's so difficult to understand where in the system a decision was made. So that is kind of broadly understood as the black box of artificial intelligence, and it's been a really, really big sticking point in discussions around AI ethics. Some of the, and broadly it's been termed this idea of explainability, but one of the most prominent ways that AI ethicists have tried to address this is through the idea of counterfactual explanations. So in that case, you would take a similar individual and their packet of information and process it through this algorithm and then change particular markers. So you would change perhaps the gender and see whether that produced a different outcome. You would then change perhaps the postcode or the race or whatever it might be in order to try and work out which particular marker produced the different outcome. But as you can probably imagine, that only works at a micro level. It doesn't address the systemic explainability of the system as a whole. There's been discussions around how these kinds of systems that use deep learning and that have an inherent kind of black box within them should not be used where dealing with really sensitive issues. We're dealing with an issue that might have a significant legal or material outcome for the individual concerned. But at the moment, it's still being used in various respects, whether that's in managing migration and securitization of migration through biometric systems at airports, or whether that's deciding whether people have access to a loan in finance and banking.
One of the things, we talk about your first point there being the fairness of it, the non-discrimination, sort of unbiased, etc. And then obviously you talk that there's systemic issues, there's just general facts, around race and gender and things like that. And one of the things I spoke to Nanda about was this sort of concept of maliciously unethical AI, which is very deliberate, versus accidentally unethical AI.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I think it is one of those things. We live in a sort of a world at the moment with, very good that we're focused on these societal issues, racial issues, gender issues, etc. But it just exists as a fact. How do you kind of manage that? That it is going to kind of have this natural bias in anyway, just because of the language
Yeah.
that's used, the sort of
Yeah.
demographics, etc. And then how do you kind of build that in so that it's still effective, but not unethical or biased at the same time? It seems like such a difficult balancing act.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's important to, at the first instance, recognize that your data set that you use is inherently biased because it reflects a biased world. So beginning by the understanding that your data is not unbiased is a good starting point. And then in terms of being able to track or understand the effect and the impact of a system on society, it's not really good enough to think about, oh well, it's just a kind of accidental byproduct of our systems. I think because of the ubiquity and the dominance of these technologies, it is incumbent upon any company that uses such technologies to do both ex post, so after the fact, and ex ante, before the fact, impact assessments that seek to actively try and understand, engage how and whether a system might or has had a discriminatory impact on particular groups of individuals. I think we need to be very attendant to the fact that biases and discrimination can occur, and do absolutely everything we can to try and address that, whether that's through impact assessments that are mandated under the General Data Protection Regulation of the EU, which kind of stands as an international best practice in this area, or whether it's through just general good business practice. Yeah, I don't think that's being done enough, and I think that there simply needs to be a greater kind of commitment to trying to understand how biases occur and how they can be overcome. And I think one of the ways that has been really productive within AI tech companies or within companies that use these technologies is to have as diverse a team as possible working in this area and with these technologies, because with a diverse team comes more diverse worldviews and different perspectives and understandings and different ways about thinking about what kind of an impact a particular system may have on a particular group within society. So I think that has been one of the most effective ways of addressing kind of ethics in a very practical way to date, is by ensuring that you have enough women in your team, by ensuring social diversity within these design teams and with the teams that implement these technologies and use them.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. It was actually going to be my next question. So I think we're kind of headed on the same track there around the diversity of teams. And it does come in a lot. And I think, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it seems like, in a way, the ultimate AI end goal is driving sort of reverse engineering diversity across organizations, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it should just be there anyway, but it does seem to be kind of pushing back into the organization this real requirement now for diversity. It's not just sort of window dressing or saying that we've got really diverse teams, but there's a real reason for it now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's a business reason, there's a practical reason, there's an ethical reason, on top of the fact that there's a social requirement as well. So yes, perhaps I think it could be pushing society in the right direction, but I think we need to take a kind of broader, more holistic understanding of the ways in which women, for example, are pushed out to studying engineering and maths from quite a young age, and to be able to look at the pipeline of a career into AI and into data technologies and all of this and data science, and ensuring that, really from an early age, that there's an effort put in place to promote women and more diverse groups in these areas, in maths and science and engineering and technology, and particularly at university.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this being Women's Month, it's really good to highlight that as well. And in 2 weeks' time, we're actually running a Women in Data / Women in STEM recorded panel discussion like this. And we have it at all our events. But I think it is obviously a very important issue. And I really do think it is from that real grassroots primary school level to get more young girls involved in these sorts of things so that it does actually come through, because at the moment there's just not enough sort of work on that. But I think back maybe to the ethics side of things, maybe if you can effectively sum up or sort of maybe give us 3 key pointers that companies, organizations, government bodies, etc., should really consider when they're developing AI strategies, and obviously the models that come from that. Because I think that's where people are, we want to do it, we want to do it right. It's a new area for us. Maybe we don't have all the skills. What do we need to consider? So maybe Rachel's top 3 tips for making sure that your usage of AI is ethical.
Okay, I probably won't be very direct, because I never really am. But I think the first one is to understand that the data you're using is not clean and objective and fair in and of itself. So even from the very basics of collecting data and annotating data and labeling data, bias can occur. Bias can occur very easily, and so we need to be attendant to that. And then secondly, I think it's to recognize that data scientists and those developing these kinds of technologies have a very powerful role within society, and the effect of their systems that they develop in conjunction with all those other systems that have been developed, and the kind of broad will to develop data technologies, means that they have a very powerful position. And so they have a particular responsibility, a particular social responsibility, to think very carefully and very clearly about where and how it may negatively impact on society, and to think about that in a very intersectional way in terms of race and age and class and gender and all other social markers. And then the third one that I don't think we've spoken about enough, but is really, really important, is to think about ethics from a South African context, and to think not just about transferring those ethical principles that have been developed elsewhere, but thinking very carefully in a detailed and localized and contextualized and meaningful way about what ethics means here in South Africa, which does mean a particular consideration around race and the history of colonialism and racialization. But it also means values like Ubuntu and understanding ourselves through others, and understanding a kind of relationality within society. So yeah, 3 very vague things, but there you go.
No, I think those are great. And I think, yeah, it's nice that you touched on that last bit, is really around, localizing and contextualizing the models and the insights and the AI, that it's not just something that's taken off the shelf and it works in other countries and therefore we're going to use it here, but sort of create it in a way that will actually solve the problems that we've got. And we're not sort of, for 1 minute suggesting that AI can solve all the issues that we have as a global society. I don't want to kind of just put South Africa on the stand here, but really use it in a way that the AI for good sort of mantra actually comes true. Because I'd like to see more examples of that really happening.
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful too about this idea of fairness and goodness, and who's defining it. Who defines what good AI means and what fair AI means? And to define it ourselves within our own context and within the history of our own complexities and issues.
Yeah, because I think that's the one thing also that I want to discuss, and so many great ideas coming through, but one of the things I really want to discuss in this series is really, it's quite conceptual, fairness, unbiased. Well, unbiased, I suppose, can be a bit easier, but sort of real fairness and stuff can be quite conceptual and quite philosophical. I mean, as you say, it's whose definition is that, who's guarding the guards in a way, who makes sure that that person that says that that is fair is checking that that person knows that it's fair, etc. It's a tricky environment for sure.
It's tricky, and I don't think the conceptual understandings of fairness have been well unpacked within discussions and debates around AI anywhere. So I think it's a really important discussion to have.
Yeah. All right. And what I'm going to do actually, and I said this to Nanda, I'll say it to you, and then I've got two more coming up with the World Economic Forum and the Alan Turing Institute in the series, is then maybe at the end of September, early October, is actually have a great panel discussion with the four of you and kind of take those different, because we've got two from South Africa, we've got the US and the UK, and then really see how all of this can kind of go into one sort of concept or what's happening in different parts of the world, and I guess close the loop on the conversation. So Rachel, thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's been really good. Before I let you go, as per is customary on the show, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with tea, coffee? Is it more tea? Is it more
coffee? My goodness.
Only coffee?
Oh, how funny. Yeah, I drink lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of coffee. And I am really missing going to coffee shops and working at coffee shops and having good coffee on tap. Yeah. So yeah. Big coffee fan.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I miss a lot as well, is just going, sort of sitting at my favorite coffee shop and just getting, a few hours work done undisturbed. But I've actually become a fairly accomplished barista since lockdown, because we can't go out and get it. So that's it. I'm going to train myself to serve.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, good for you. And you'll probably save lots of money as well.
Well, I don't know. Every time I go to a coffee shop or find something, I end up buying their beans. So I'm helping small business. I feel good, but I'm not so sure about the money saving side of things. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig. It's been really, really nice to chat.
Yeah, likewise, Rachel, and we'll chat soon. Thanks so much.